So today I'm just going to talk about something not completely different, but a little bit different. And one of the great things about dealing with consumers and parents is that we really start thinking about different technologies and being allowed to be kind of creative. And what I'm going to talk about today is some pretty high technology, which relates to this telephony platform that we use, but also a very traditional type of communication system, which is a conversation. And I'm just reminded at work all the time as I run around and send a million emails. I'm starting to have this mantra, like, sometimes we just have to sit down and have a conversation. And it plays out in work all the time. And so this mode of communication is very powerful, and we've got some cool technical approaches to that. So just by way of very quick background, I think we all recognize there's a pretty huge gap between what's recommended for primary care for kids and what actually occurs. I think there's an even larger gap related to the care of chronic conditions and what actually happens between visits to primary care settings. And in our work, and in collaboration with AHRQ and a number of other groups, we're really committed to these patient-centered concepts of responding to individuals and individual needs, engaging patients outside clinical settings, providing access to personal health information whenever possible, and really empowering patients to be more active participants in their own healthcare, in our own healthcare systems. And these are the driving forces between the stuff I do. Today I was just going to talk really briefly about some of the benefits of interactive voice response systems or telephony systems, describe to you briefly two of the projects that we've been doing and some of the stuff we've learned from those projects, and then just a little bit of a discussion at the end to wrap things up. So one of the great things about conversational IT, is what we call this approach, is that telephones are probably the most ubiquitous technology that we have. Certainly mobile phones are even cooler, but the telephone is just around and available to the vast majority of people. Phone numbers don't always stay the same, but the technology is there and available. This idea that communication through spoken language may better support lower literacy families. So like Alex, I practice in an urban health setting, and this idea that spoken language and also the directedness of a conversation in terms of gathering information and providing advice can be a really powerful approach to communication. And I don't know how many folks know it here, but these interactive systems, the technology itself has really moved ahead. So most telephony systems now are internet-based. The use of voice XML and voice over IP make these systems incredibly scalable. So you could easily have 10,000 conversations at the same time if you wanted to. So the first project, and the one that's freshest for us, because we just wrapped it up about 6 months ago, is the use of one of these telephony systems before primary care visits in Boston. And the goal of this study was to determine whether a parent-centered, so it was just the mom or the dad on the phone, interactive voice response system closely integrated with an electronic health record can improve the quality of child health supervision, a fair number of components around medication safety, and this idea that if we could better inform parents before visits and actually use some behavioral theory to activate them before visits, could we actually engage parents and create more proactive health consumers? So those were the main objectives of the study. And we've created this system we call the Personal Health Partner. It's a fully automated conversational system, so it creates synthetic speech and it recognizes the things that parents say to it over the phone. It's a pure internet-based technology. Parents call 3 to 5 days before a visit. We create these data-driven age-specific modules, so for each age of the child, a sort of a customized conversation is created by the data system. And a fair amount of the EHR data is actually available to the computer during the calls so that the conversation can be altered based on things that are in the record and customized and tailored to the patient. And we do some assessment pieces, so we ask questions. We use those answers to actually counsel parents. And then we pass that data directly into the EHR to make it available. And I'm sure you're all curious, this is where the demo part comes in, of what our talking computer sounds like.
Hi, thanks for calling the Personal Health Partner. My name is Susan, and I will be talking with you today. My job is to help the doctor out by gathering information about the families coming to see pediatricians at Boston Medical Center. I know this might surprise you, but I am not a real person. I'm actually a talking computer, but I was programmed by real people who know what it's like raising kids today. So I know we will be...
So this idea that a database could talk to a family and could gather information in a novel way that involves no screens, no reading, and pretty ubiquitous technology is sort of the stuff that we're driving here. And just a quick look at how it shows up in the EHR. After these conversations, we create this payload of data, which is not really available to anyone until they actually go in and try to care for the patient. So it's in the background when the provider, we have this kind of universal start to all of our primary care visits. When the provider clicks the RHCM tab there, it displays the fact that there's patient-entered data. The data that's been entered is all available to the clinician to review, to change, and then with a single button, all of it can be accepted. And then it actually pre-populates the well visit for the child, so that there's quite a bit of time saving for the provider as well. I didn't notice, but also at the bottom there, there's a bunch of alerts too. So things that aren't directly linked to a piece of data in the record come across as kind of generic alerts for the clinician. So we evaluated the system in a randomized trial supported by AHRQ. Half the families used a standardized interactive safety survey, and the others used PHP. They were for kids under 12 years old by and large. We offered a small incentive, and we were able to look at a whole bunch of different data that the system generated and the parents provided us. Getting back to this engaging parents issue, though, is I just show this not so much to give you all the details of enrollment, but it actually was not that easy to get parents to call. This was a research study. There was a big chunk of informed consent in the middle of these brochures that we sent out, but we sent out almost 7,000 mailings, and we ultimately got about 606, so about 10% of people to call in. So we don't know whether it was the complexity of the form or the this research component to this, but in order to really engage parents and families, they need to use these systems, and I think being creative around that is still an open area for people to work on. It was an inner-city clinic, but I think in general, the parents who called were, as you'd expect, mostly moms, but they were of a higher educational degree and a little more employment than we would expect on average, and actually a lower proportion of African Americans. So we think the people who actually called in might be slightly different consumers. Although they do represent our practice, they are a little bit different. So some sample alerts, we were able to detect that kids don't eat their vegetables, that kids watch too much TV, that they don't eat vegetables. We were able to pick up parental smoking really effectively. We were able to screen for depression very well. We were able to do med reconciliation, but as I'll show you in a second, we weren't really able to move it very well. So the ambulatory pediatric medication list is a bit of a nightmare, as some of you might have noticed as well in your EHRs. And we were able to screen for tuberculosis as well pretty effectively and find kids who were actually at risk for TB. The cool thing is when these things popped up, though, the computer could actually ask the parent to commit to doing something during the visit. So, for example, when it showed up that the child was watching too much TV time, we would ask the parent, do you think you could commit to trying to reduce your child's TV time? Unfortunately, not that many parents were willing to commit to that. We only got about 10%. But among smokers, about 25% were willing to commit to calling the quit line. So this idea of supporting health behaviors through some kind of low-tech behavioral modification type stuff. For parents who were depressed, about 15% agreed to bring up their feelings of sadness to the doctor, just not wait for it to happen, although we also sent this information to the doctor as well. Everyone was very happy to remind the doctor that they were needing a PPD test. So this idea that some topics are easier than parents, obviously, to promise to bring up during a visit. And among folks who were on a medication, about 20% said they would bring them to the medicine, so to the visit, and that was a little bit disappointing as well. And then what we did was we actually called up families after the visit and we said, did anything change, or what actually happened in the visit? And the idea here was that we could drive the actual content of the visit by activating and informing our parents. And when it came, so the p-value is on the right-hand side and the proportions are shown for the control and the PHP group here. And we weren't able to do too much around TV, but when it came to depression, we almost doubled the content or the proportion of visits that where parents reported discussing their feelings of sadness during the visit. And we're actually able to drive the actual parental reported use of TB testing as well through this risk assessment. So different content is easier to move, harder to move. Clinicians are obviously motivated by different things, but the idea that parents can provide information in a low-barrier way and share it with the clinician and have it actually change what happens in the visit was what we learned from this. And then we found some pretty interesting stuff from parents, too. So the parents liked it because they could use it at home. So parents are interested in doing these, having this experience outside of clinical settings. They liked it because it was over the phone. And actually only around 40% would have preferred to do it over the internet. So we were wondering, is the web a better way? And for this population, I think it's a complementary way, but that there's some real value in this telephony-based approach. Parents thought actually for PHP it reduced the length of visits. With all the med reconciliation, we actually got a lower proportion of PHP users who actually thought that the amount of time was reasonable. It took about 30 minutes for a PHP call and about 15 minutes for the control call. But overall, the PHP parents felt better prepared for the visits. And pretty much about 90% or so would recommend using this type of pre-visit telephony thing before a visit. So overall, the response was quite positive. And then for the docs, there was also very strong support for this type of system. They thought it was easy to use. They thought it actually, 90% thought it actually reminded them to do things they might otherwise forget. About 80% thought it improved the efficiency, and none of them thought it slowed things down. The docs were less convinced that it shortened the time of visits, but everyone in my clinic's always complaining about how long the visits are, so that one's hard to move, actually. And they were a little bit less convinced that it could substantially help with this medication reconciliation thing. But 100% thought it improved the quality of care that they delivered. So again, some pretty positive reinforcement. And then, let me just check the time here.
Like 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So this one I'm going to do quicker, but it's the same idea that you could use an interactive conversational system, but actually over a continuous basis to address overweight in kids, and 9 to 12-year-old kids. So we call this the Healthy Eating and Activity Today system. This was a fairly complicated system where parents used the talking computer at home, and it was also integrated with the primary care site. We tried to pull in evidence-based interventions around the traffic light diet and the smart media campaign, and we really directed this at these most susceptible 9 to 12-year-old kids and their parents. The thing that was novel about this approach is we actually asked the parents to do everything that we asked the kids to do. So there was really this parent-child co-use of the system, and we think that actually helped. It was much longer duration, so people were asked to call in once a week over a 12-week period to do 12 calls. The calls were brief, 10 to 20 minutes, and we had some pretty complicated scripts. I worked really closely with some behavioral scientists so that the content was really driven by the parent and the child and their experience around trying goals and goal-setting behavior and a whole bunch of classical behavior change systems. Now for this one, the kids had a chronic problem that the parents cared about, and we were actually able to enroll 50% of all our eligible families in this study. So on the one hand, you send out a brochure that's complicated and hard to understand. People may not call in, but when you have a conversation with a research assistant about an important problem and a potentially helpful intervention, the enrollment rates were actually quite a bit higher. And our main outcomes were weight, BMI, fruits and veggie intake, and TV time. And I'll just skip this, but these guys really were very representative of our clinic. People use the system, 8 to 9 calls each on average, and the mean length of call was only 12 minutes, so these were pretty brief interactions. And unfortunately, it was a randomized trial. In the heat and control groups, we did not find a significant difference in weight either for the parent or the child. But when we actually looked at the high users, and I recognize that this is not exactly kosher because it's a randomized trial, but in the high users of the system, we found effects pretty comparable to some of the much higher touch obesity interventions that have been tried. So this was a pilot study. It was only 25 families in each group. But we find this kind of data compelling that in a larger study, we may well be able to find differences, particularly if we choose the children and families who are really ready to engage this type of technology, because we pretty much took all comers for numbers on this study, but in our next study, we would actually require that families make a couple calls first before they would be enrolled in the study, so that people were really ready to engage in the system. So I guess my takeaway messages for this are, I think families are very open to using systems like PHP and the HEAT system, the weight management system that we have. I think IVR has some unique strengths, although for the next system I build, it will be multi-channel, so parents will be able to choose whether they jump on a website and answer these questions or do it over the phone. And certainly the data system will be shared, but families can choose actually how to use these systems. And at least in my experience, I would say that really having the users be engaged in the system is critical. And for obvious reasons, the more they're going to hear to these systems, if they work, they're going to work better. The other big thing I've learned is that multidisciplinary teams are critical to this type of thing. The work that I've done with behavioralists, I tend to cover the PCP and the informatics side, but bringing in behavioralists or people who really understand about human behavior and how to influence human behavior in a positive way are critical. And then the big frontier, and I think we're beginning to make some real progress here, is tightly integrating it to the point of care and having that data seamlessly flow in and be usable by the primary care team is critical. And our families and our clinicians both agree with that too. So kind of a new twist on a common problem, which is engaging parents and gathering data. The thing I like most about it is its speech, and it's very behavioral and interactive, and we're going to hope to keep doing more of this type of stuff.